and welcome to another episode of the Till Nut Show. As always, we are your hosts. We have the fabulous Trisha Fox, who is the author of Son of Deception and The White Leaf Child. She's the homeschooling mom of four, avid reader, and gamer.
And my co-host is Julia J.K. Allen, editor, author, and author coach. She's a fantasy and horror author who loves to sprinkle magic on everything. Thanks for joining us.
Yes, and we're very excited to welcome our guest tonight. Why don't you tell us all about him?
Yes, Zack Jeffries. I'm very excited to meet him. We've been TikTok pals for a while.
Yeah.
Jeffries is the author of young adult urban fantasy stories like The Unseen Curse and the series called Angels of New York State. He writes middle grade sci-fi and craft nonfiction as well. He believes in happily ever afters, cliffhangers only after closure, and really dark book twos. Welcome.
Yes, welcome. So great to meet you.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. I love you guys' content. I love following you guys on YouTube.
Oh, thank you so much. That's very kind of you. I love your setup with the Witch's Fate. Oh, very nice.
Thank you. Yeah, this is the new one. Probably about 2 weeks old by the time this goes out.
Very, very nice. So tell us a little bit about your writing journey. What got you started as a writer, and what's it look like for you?
Well, I feel like this is the answer so often. I've been writing pretty much something my whole life. My mom was an English teacher, and when I was very young, she was a substitute English teacher, and she took over a class about halfway through. The teacher ended up moving away or something, and I was a kindergartner, and I would do my half day at kindergarten. And then I would get picked up by one of her students to walk back to class, and I would sit in the back of her class and listen to my mom teach, I think it was 9th grade English. And like I'm playing on the floor and, coloring with crayons and like listening to lectures about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and all of this literature and stuff. And just got the bug really early. I've always written something in high school, a lot of bad poetry. In college, I was a theater kid, so I wrote tons of plays, tons of one acts, a lot of sketch. Eventually started writing fanfic and short stories. And then about 11 years ago, I really started doing NaNoWriMo every year, and kind of petered out year after year, hitting the 20,000 mark, maybe 30,000 mark, and then nothing else came of it. And then in 2016, I finally finished a book, and I've had the bug ever since. And now I'm writing a little more than 2 books a year.
Oh, very nice. That is quite the productivity, actually. Yeah, I'm very impressed. Kudos.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, no, it's so quite an accomplishment to write any book, but to write 2 books a year, yes, very great job.
Consistently,
yes, I love though that the insidious nature of the literature infiltrating your little 3-year-old brain as you're playing in the back of your mom's classroom. That's so awesome though that that you had that experience. I think that's wonderful. My sister used to read, so she would come into my classroom. She was 5 years older, so she'd come in as a 5th grader to my kindergarten class and I'd read with some of the students, and so I'd always be like, "Hi, Sissy," and it was just such a fun thing, fun part of my day. But yes, I love that you were able to spend the time in your mom's classroom, and I totally relate with the bad, angsty high school poetry. Oh my goodness.
I was the majority of writers definitely say that they knew really early on how much they loved writing. So.
Yes. I think that storytelling is such an innate part of being human. And then you just get the bug early on when it comes to writing. Yeah. So why did you choose the genres that you wrote? So we were talking about you do mostly fantasy and you do some middle grade, or?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I kind of had one story stuck in my head for quite a long time that I always thought it would be a great book, and I tried to write it in several different capacities through years. Like I literally thought it up mowing lawns as a kid, and I tried it every couple of years. Tried to write it as a screenplay, a series of short stories, and it never really gelled. And that ended up being Chase the Boy Who Hid, the Hide and Seek Chronicles. Right here, this is
Oh,
my middle grade sci-fi,
nice.
and I just fell in love with the story, and I really like it. And I found very quickly how much I enjoyed writing for that age where boys kind of fall off reading, whether it's because they're really pushed into sports or extracurriculars, collecting hobbies, all that kind of stuff. A lot of things like take away from reading, and reading is kind of like socially looked down upon for boys. And so I'm trying to write, I call them sci-fi adventures at the speed of light. Really like get the guys hooked, get them falling into this huge adventure, competing with video games, competing with Marvel movies and all that kind of stuff to
Right.
hold their attention. And I wrote that. I wrote 4 books in that series. Book 5 should be coming out this year. I started another sci-fi series geared a little younger, like traditional middle grade. This is probably upper middle grade. And then Pro Wrestling Saves Earth is traditional middle grade. And that's, and I really enjoyed that. And I sell a lot at in-person events, but it's really difficult to make a career out of it, to make the sales online when the person that you're selling to is not the person reading it. So like this is fun and adventures and lasers and fart jokes. And I really, really love these books and I super dig them, but you have to kind of sell them like vegetables. Like they're really good for you. You can't really talk about the flavor because the person's not consuming it.
Right.
So then I went back to the books that I really love reading. And for the longest time, I felt like it was a guilty pleasure. And now I'm just owning it. I just love angsty teens in magical worlds.
Right.
Holly Black is one of my favorite authors. The Raven Cycle by Maggie Stiefvater was one of my absolute favorites. The Charlene Harris True Blood Sookie Stackhouse novels, all of those. And I just love them. And for the longest time, I had this concept of, literature being this really stuffy thing, and every sentence has to have 7 meanings, and you have to put your worldview into every single word. Or it can be fun stuff, and your worldview, if you're confident in it and it's a part of you, it's gonna come through. Your perspective, your ideas will come through in the characters and the plots, and you can write something that's fun.
Absolutely agree. No, I, as somebody who attempted to read Finnegan's Wake, and as for class, not for fun, for class, but somebody who was supposed to read Finnegan's Wake, which is one of those, when we talk about literature, that you have to decipher meaning, and there's 7 different meanings in each sentence. Like, young adult is what I love to write, because I love tackling those issues, though, of coming to age, discovering who you want to be. Like, those themes are so important to me and so fun for me to explore with those characters, and I love it. And you're so right. There's lessons embedded into the writing as you go, just because of what you believe, right? Yeah. I was curious, though, of you coming from a screenwriting background, how difficult was it to do the novels?
It was pretty tough. My first couple of novels, I have 2 trunk novels that will never see the light of day.
Right.
But and even still, my first drafts are almost pure dialogue. I usually have to, I'm an underwriter in my first draft, and then my next drafts, I fill things out with thought and description and things like that. It used to be all like blank white rooms and nobody moves, just talking heads. So that's been the biggest challenge. But the best part is, because of screenwriting and playwriting in particular, especially studying like Shakespeare and structure of plays, because it's so rigid, because you have an intermission and you have a 2-act, a 3-act, a 5-act, and all those kind of things. Story structure is just in my blood, and I almost never have to fudge with that when I go back through and I'm doing my revisions. Usually the story structure is really, really solid for me. And so that's been something that I've carried through that's really, really helped. Then on the other hand, I have to make sure that the ideas are explored fully that aren't in the dialogue.
Absolutely. No, I think that structure, a lot of people, structure is that kind of missing key for them where they're like, I don't know what happens next. But if you know the story structure, then you can kind of figure out what needs to happen at the different beats, those different points. So yes, I love that. I also am an underwriter where I have to go through and add a lot of description and what's going on while they're talking, because I'll have walls of text as well.
Yeah.
Even I don't have the excuse of being a playwright first, but I can relate very much so to that.
I think it's really wonderful that you're writing to the boys who really need those adventures and everything. I mean, I remember really well being about 10 and finally finding a book that I loved. Like that had never happened before. Before it was always adults saying, you have to read, like you have to read for school. And it was never anything that I wanted to read. You know, it was vegetables. It was information. It was, you know, it was never fun. And it was a sci-fi adventure from written by Bruce Cavill, you know, called My Teacher's an Alien. And it was hysterical.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I remember those books.
I remember that book. That's a good one.
Bruce Cavill is responsible for getting so many people into reading as kids. So I think that's great. And I'm the mom of a 12-year-old boy, and I love when he's reading a book and he's laughing and smiling and he has to put the book down for a moment to just take a breath and then continue.
And like process, yeah.
It's the best feeling ever to see that. So on behalf of moms everywhere, thanks. That's great.
Oh, thank you. And thanks for being a mom that pushes books and gifts books and stuff like that. The best feedback I've gotten, I actually have one reader who had to buy a second group of the Hide and Seek Chronicles, the series, because the younger brother was finally old enough to read, but the older brother wasn't sharing because he was reading the second time.
That's so
yeah, so their house has 2 copies now, and just my favorite story to hear.
A bit of the trick with him is that I'll give him 2 or 3 books at a time. And I don't give them to him and say, you have to read these. I just like leave them on his desk. And then he sits down and he goes, oh, books. And like looking at the covers, he decides what he wants to read next. But if they're in his room, they're in his sphere of vision, and he just naturally picks them up. So it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I have heard the best way to get children to read is to just have books in the house.
Just have books in the house.
Modeling the behavior, having the books available for sure.
And then and I totally agree with you on the angsty teens and the YA. Like it's one of my greatest pleasures. I love Cassandra Clare, especially. She writes all of these angsty teenagers with big missions and all this forbidden romance, and just I buy everything she puts out because I just can't get enough of it.
Right. It's
so very, very fun genres.
It is. And there's still value to be had in those genres too. I know we keep saying like they're guilty pleasures, but hey, like they still are great books.
Absolutely. No, yeah. And then I think it's great that you have that pacing, just naturally that pacing from all of the practice. Like that's something that I personally really struggle with, is how to segment those arcs in a way that makes sense. So usually I find those like the 7th draft in.
Right.
But man, are those first drafts just kind of ugly. And that's okay. The first draft is for
yes, absolutely. They are meant to be messy.
I actually forgot which question we're on.
The 3rd one. Yeah, no, you're fine.
All right. What does your writing process look like? How do you get from idea to finished draft?
Oh man, I'm 10 books in and 10 different processes. I am generally a little bit more of a pantser than a plotter, and I think that also comes from being confident in structure, that I don't feel I have to map certain things out. The more I go, the more I feel like I do need to map out usually I pick like 5 points in an interior character arc. So I make sure that the interior character arc has a build to it and is moving towards stuff. But I mean, it can come from anything. I get ideas from everywhere. I have a book that is a YA magical murder mystery that's slightly based on the old Sylvester Stallone movie Copland, which is not a magical murder mystery, but I literally watched this movie and I was thinking, man, wouldn't it be more interesting if it were about wizards? And I took a couple attempts at writing that, and it usually takes me a bit to find what my in is, what angle I'm going to approach it with. And I'm literally doing that right now to book 3 to Angels of New York State. I think I finally just found the in and the angle in. And then, once I find that angle in, I will draft for 6 to 8 weeks. And then I'll have a first draft. Again, it's usually a little on the lighter side. That's usually going to be like right at like 60,000 words, maybe even a little less. And then I'll leave it and work on another project, come back. And the first thing I'll do is I'll have to just basic cleanup, like make sure no one's name changes throughout, and make sure that, you know, if they started off where the house was blue, but at the end of it they had to have a greenhouse for that particular reason, I clean all that stuff up and I kind of read and get a feel for it then. And then I usually really focus on that character arc to guide my revisions. And then after that, I'm very blessed. I have some fantastic critique partners and beta readers, and they're always great about giving me feedback. I have the best editor in the game, Charlie Knight, cknightwrites.com. They're amazing, and they're really used to my writing now, and so they can catch me on traps I fall into and stuff like that. And then after that, off to the proofreader. So the drafting is completely different every single time, but I've been lucky enough to have a set routine, 10 books in. So I do know the steps where we go once the draft is done.
Okay. Yes, love that. That's not too dissimilar from what I do, in the fact that every time I write a book, I feel like my process is different.
Yeah.
But I think that's what works, is being adaptable and being willing to change and make those little adjustments as you go. I find that's really helpful. Do you have something that you think is the most important part of writing?
The most important part of writing, I think you really have to love your characters. And I think you have to love them in a way that a person loves another person. Like, you can't pretend the flaws aren't there. You have to know that the flaws are there. You have to set them up to do their best and do their worst, knowing what their flaws are.
Right.
And you really just have to enjoy writing them, enjoy being around them, because I feel like if you're not having fun, if you're not enjoying it, I can't imagine that the reader would enjoy it or have fun with it. And that's not to say you can't write unlikable characters or characters that do the wrong thing, but you have to like to be around them. You have to love going through the process with them, because it's going to be a long process. It's going to take a long time. It's going to take a lot of energy, and they have to, just like people in our lives, they have to be worth your time or energy, or you're going to start resenting them or having less fun, or you're really going to not look forward to spending time with them. And you've got to look forward to spending time with them if you're going to finish the book.
Right. Absolutely. Wow. You're going to read your own book so many times.
Ooh. Yeah. Oh my God. The amount of times that you read your own book before you send it to the editor and then before you hit publish is wild. But no, no, I love that answer because it's so true. Characters are what I fall in love with in other people's stories. And
Mm-hmm.
so it makes sense then that I need to love my own characters to spend time writing them.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And I feel that that is like naturally what happens is we love our characters and we're so intrigued by their stories, and that's why we can't help but want to write every second of the day when we're bit by that bug. Um,
Sure.
so I think that that's a great answer to that question.
All right. What would you say you've learned from the writing process?
Oh man, so much. Just being open to change and being able to pivot and not walk into a situation thinking that you have all the answers. I'm not. I'm not. I know there are a lot of authors that are surprised by the characters or have trouble controlling their characters. That's definitely not me, but I do understand as I'm going if a certain aspect, uh, a detail becomes more interesting. And I know that if I'm
Right.
finding it interesting, that a reader is going to find it interesting and things like that. I also understand specifically from, I think the one thing that is so important for characters is that they have to want something, they have to be motivated
Yes.
for that. And that motivation is always going to come from a real place based on their upbringing, based on their worldview, based on their needs and where they are socioeconomically and geographically and all that kind of stuff. And that helps me in the real world, just having empathy and always remembering that uh, if I disagree with someone, I can't think of myself as the good person and them as the bad person. We're both
Right.
two different people with two different sets of circumstances, with two different sets of motivations. And by trying to understand the other person's motivation, we might not understand what the other person's, life experience is, what the other person's socioeconomical status is, but we can empathize and think about what is it that this other person wants out of this situation and how can we resolve it in such a way that both of us get the most from what we both want and need without causing harm to the other.
Right. No, that's very DBT of you. Dialectical behavior theory is great at saying there is no good or bad unless we're talking about like spoiled milk is bad. We can objectively say that, but there's really no good or bad. There's just helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's what I like to say not helpful. They say harmful, but I still feel like that has judgment to it. But yeah, helpful, not helpful, and everything has a cause, right? So understanding that everything has a cause, we can figure out how to move forward in the best way. So I love that answer. And I think it's very true with characters that if you know your character's motivations, you're going to know your plot because you're going to know what they're going to decide to do at each junction when they have that choice because their motivation's really what drives them. So I love learning that about my characters. That's one of the first things I do is flaws, goal, and motivations for the characters. So, and the flaws have to impede them from getting the story goal. They can't be cutesy flaws like, oh, I'm clumsy one time in my life. And yeah. So those are the three things that I always encourage people to figure out about their characters to really, really start to bring them to life and not just be on the page. Yes. Do you have a favorite author? You've mentioned some, but what do you think they do best?
I'm so much of a mood reader. I'm a mood writer too. That I probably I don't have a definitive favorite author. I have a bunch of different authors that I really like for a bunch of different things. I think my favorite themes come from like N.K. Jemisin and Charlie Jane Anders. I think some of my favorite settings are probably Holly Black. My favorite character relationships probably Maggie Stiefvater. My favorite magic systems, most likely Sarah Gailey. So yeah, I think I pick and choose different aspects from different authors, but I don't have a flat out favorite author of all time. I don't really have many what I would call like auto buy authors, but
Mm-hmm.
like if it's an interesting plot, then I'll always read Wesley Chu or Marie Lu. Um, if I'm, intrigued by the romance, I'm going to read Encaceres, based on what I hear about the book. But yeah, I don't have one singular favorite author. Just a lot of great ones out there.
Yes, and that's why it's so important to read widely and read deeply because you can learn from all the different genres and different
Mhm,
authors in those genres, different things, right? So,
mhm.
yes, I
Yeah,
love
as you're
that.
saying, you can find inspiration from things that have nothing to do with your genres,
Yes,
but just those little seeds of inspiration, and you grow something that doesn't even resemble where they came from. But that's
yeah,
that's the vibe that you took from it. The. So you never know where you're going to find your next inspiration.
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm all about cross pollinating vibes.
Mhm,
Like
Hmm.
book one and Angels of New York State is like vaguely she's all that rom com between a Grim Reaper and a Greek Fate. And then I took some secondary characters who are witches, and they're trying to connect in this one night. It's like a compressed 24 hours where all these different pieces are moving, and I really kind of leaned into like Pulp Fiction with like chopping it up and having these stories like weave in and out while everyone's
Yeah,
on their individual like mission. And I just love, yeah, like you said, like just taking something that's not necessarily this genre and using it as a motivation for the next one.
mhm.
Book three is going to be a little bit of Cinderella story structure because I think it's one of the best structured stories out there, and Terminator 2. And I'm
mm,
gonna marry those in the most obvious way because obviously those stories go together so well.
yeah. No, I love that though. Because there's no such thing as an original story, right? All the stories have been told, but you can do such
Yeah.
interesting things to make them new again in your story, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I
I
love
like
that.
how you put that too. Like even like as a pitch, you're like, well, it's a little bit like Cinderella and Terminator 2. And that in turn makes
Yeah,
people go, what? What? Like they're
right,
like,
right.
how? How? Like that's a story I want to hear. How did you put those two together and make a cohesive story? So
Yeah,
that
yeah.
immediately makes you just want to know what is that story about?
You got your elevator pitch already. Yes,
Yeah.
I
Yep.
love that. So, being busy as we all are, how do you make time for writing?
So when I am lucky enough to be a dad, it's
Yeah.
the best job in the world. And heading into that, I was doing a lot of writing. I pretty much already finished the hide and seek, or finished the first four books of the Hide and Seek Chronicles, and I just knew that I was going to step up to be the stay at home and work part time, and I just started writing wherever I could, just taking things, and I stopped trying to create a perfect spot that I needed to write, and
Hmm.
I kind of abandoned the idea of having a set area or a set amount of circumstances that I had to write. So music, no music, on the couch, at the desk, on my
Hmm.
phone, waiting for my kid to get out of gymnastics, like anything. I
Right.
I worked on being able to just steal time where I could, and that's really what I do now. I write when I can. I generally speaking, I'm the last one to sleep in this house.
Mm.
And so from like 8 to midnight, May to 11 is where I get most of my writing done. And I always, and this is a life hack, a tip for people who have a tough time starting each writing session. I
Hmm.
always end in the middle of something. I don't finish a chapter. I don't finish an action sequence. I will stop in the middle of it, sometimes even in the middle of a sentence, that I know how it finishes, so that I
Mm-hmm.
have momentum and I step into the next writing session and it just flows easily into the next thing. But the trick is to then start the next one so I can have a place to leave off before
Right,
before the
right.
next one.
No, I have heard that tip before. I just am so ADHD that I worry that I will forget by the next time I write.
I leave myself little notes. I'm
Right.
like, Zach, don't forget
Okay.
this
I
guy.
was I was about to say because I'm like if I stop in the middle of the sentence, I'm gonna come back and be like, wow, I really wish I knew where that was going. But no, that is such a good tip though, because like a lot of times people sit down and they kind of freeze because they're like, what do I do now? Like I know I want to write, but what do I actually write in this
Mhm.
moment? And so that is a really great tip if you're in the middle of a fight scene or something, you know what you're in the middle of, then you can kind of finish that off and then have the momentum to start the next bit to
Mhm.
then leave yourself trails for later.
What I
Yeah,
do is similar, where I go back a couple of pages and I'll read what I wrote before. So when there's
mm,
the drop off, I'm already into it. I'm already there. I'm in that scene.
right, right. Yeah, it can be hard to kind of access that writer brain of in that moment without these little tips. So I love those hacks.
Especially when you're watching kids while you're writing, or if they're there,
Right.
you've only got half your brain, and it's running on
Yes.
4 hours of sleep.
Yes, I know. Every time we ask that question, people are always like, "I don't sleep as much as I should," and I feel really bad that that's always. I feel like that's always what goes though, so that we have the time for writing is that sleep. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If you could tell a new author one thing, what would it be?
Um, I think cheapen your words. Like if you like, just get a lot of writing out and understand that you can always cut things out. Or if you write and the story isn't going anywhere, or you don't love the characters, or you don't love the
Mm,
story, uh, it's not bad to abandon it, because you are still getting experience, you are still honing your
right.
craft, you're becoming a better writer by writing. I'll tell you, it is so much harder to revise your book rather
Mm,
than revise one of your books, because your book is, the culmination of all of your life experience and education, and every book that you've ever read or loved and every word you've ever written is moving towards this one thing. Well, if you want to write more than one story in your whole life, then there are going to be
mm,
a lot of those, and you can take the pressure off yourself by, finish a first draft and then go write a short story or write another
right.
story. And so your brain starts to understand, oh, this is one of many things I am going to do. So I'm not
Mm,
going to beat myself up. I'm not going to emotionally abuse myself over every
right.
step moving forward, because they're all just steps in your journey, and it's a big old journey, and there's going to be
Mm,
failures and there's going to be a lot of stuff. But if your words are super precious and every single word you keep and every single word is super important, then it's going to be really hard for you to separate yourself enough to revise it for the good of the story.
mm. I love that advice because it's like, yeah, we're not all writing our magnum opus. Every book is not going to be the culmination of our legacy and our wit and everything involved with that. Um, and yes, nothing should be seen as wasted time either. That we can write and throw away stories, and that's okay too because we still got practice and learning out of it. I love that mindset.
Mhm.
I think
Some, sorry.
no, you're fine.
Sometimes I have to write it wrong to learn what the
Yeah,
story isn't.
Oh, yeah.
So I'll cut out whole
yeah,
giant chapters because that is what the story is. I have to get it wrong first and then come back and be like, no, we're gonna take this other path.
yeah, yeah.
So
No, I have two things to say to that. One is I never get rid of anything. If you have a hard time deleting, have a separate document where you can keep
mhm,
things that you take out of your story, but can look at and incorporate later. Like if you like that turn of phrase or you like that idea, put it in a different story. And two goes along with what you were like initially saying that sometimes if you're writing a story, it's harder to revise it because it's not working. start with a blank page, get a new document going, and just retell the story. And you'll often find you tell it better the second time, anyways. So if
Mm-hmm.
you go through and you're writing it wrong, it's okay to sometimes say, like, well, I'm just going to start with a fresh page and try again, because you have collected your thoughts by then. And sometimes what comes out is better. Rather than trying to salvage bits from the rough draft that you have already. Sometimes starting new is really helpful.
It can be overwhelming to look at this huge document and trying to figure out how to iron it all out. And, if something is blocking you, you got to just find the workaround.
Yes. Yeah, a lot of times blocks are often those moments where we're trying to force something that is just not working for the story overall, too. So that can be helpful to know.
Right. What would you say is your favorite part of writing?
Wow, that's tough. Probably stories of connecting with readers, stories from readers and things like that. I really do love drafting, and I love brainstorming, and I do love getting notes back from my critique partners and editors, and beta readers. But and it takes a while. You have to get a little bit into your writing career, I feel, to establish some sort of readership where they're comfortable enough that you start hearing stories back. And I absolutely love it. Like my wife was talking with a coworker of hers and was talking about, my husband's a writer. And she was like, I'm in Bookstagram. Let me know what he wrote. I'll check it out. And my wife sent over one of my books, and she was like, he wrote The Unseen Curse. No, I absolutely know about that book, and all of this kind of stuff. There's a kid who read Chase the Boy Who Hid and did a book report on it. And his teacher said, that's not a reputable book because it's independently published. And then the kid, but this is a good story. There's redemption here. The kid puts together like evidence, like he brought the reviews, he showed my website, he brought in the physical book, and the teacher listened to him. The teacher changed her mind, and the kid got an A.
Yay!
And hearing these stories, those are my absolute favorite. Kids grabbing these books and just disappearing for 5 hours and just reading them in a solid sitting. There's a mother-daughter where her daughter's a teenager, and they're reading this series together, and it kind of opens up some conversations that maybe they wouldn't be having about high school life otherwise. So the best part for me has been hearing back from readers about gaining these stories in the midst of their lives.
That is amazing. Yeah,
that is definitely one of my favorite parts. There's a folder on my computer where I stash all of the kind comments from people, and it's a good place to go when I'm feeling down or don't feel like what I'm doing matters to anyone.
Totally.
Right.
But that's the fuel that really keeps us going. It's just knowing that people love our stories and are connecting.
Makes it all worth it.
I have the best readers. My group of newsletter subscribers, they named themselves.
I love that. Yeah.
They're the best. They're the Zed heads. And then the Zed heads that volunteer to ARC read or beta read, those are my Zeta readers. And it's a great crew. We meet over all social medias and the newsletter, and I am extremely lucky and very, very grateful for having found the readership that I have.
That does sound amazing. Do you have a least favorite part of writing?
I mean, I feel like there's always the muddy middle that I always run into, and it's fine. There are workarounds, there are ways of getting through it. I do a lot of writing prompts for myself where I try to focus on something instead of the plot and the arcs and the characters. And if I focus on something else, I'll get through it. There's always a revision pass where I don't like the book They're like no
Right.
matter what. And it's been every single book, and it's unavoidable. And I'm finally at the point where I anticipate it and I
Yeah.
understand what's coming. But I remember for the first like 6 books, I was like blindsided by it every single
Right.
time that like the third or fourth revision pass, and like, this is terrible. It's never gonna
Right.
gel. Why do I even bother? And it's just a part of the process, and you get
Right.
through it. And then one day you read it and you're like, oh, that clever turn. That's pretty clever. I really like this book. And then it
Yes.
comes back to
Yes.
you.
Mhm.
Yeah. The self-loathing is all part of the process.
It's part of the process. If you haven't hated your book yet, it's not ready.
Right?
Right. You haven't read it enough times if you haven't hated it yet. Yeah.
Totally.
Oh
So
my gosh. I love
this
that.
is one of my favorite questions. What has been your most significant writing victory so far?
I'm not positive. I think in a way, I'll say what it is. My biggest weakness was uh, prose for character interiors. I do deep third person. I think that's all I've written as far as books go. I've written short stories in like first, but so I'm in the characters' brains and stuff. But still, my strong suit was always dialogue and character,
Yeah.
voice, and interesting plots and settings and magic systems. But I think I challenge myself. I have something to work on for every book, a shortcoming that I think I can shore up and improve upon. Uh, and for the first time, I had some comments about ideas and the interior life of characters and exploring these ideas. And that was for this book. It was the beta reads for this book were really astonishing because I was getting a lot of compliments that I had never gotten before. And because I had been writing these plays and people have been like, oh, I got to hear feedback on my character voice and I knew about that. And so once I got the same kind of feedback on my books, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, that's what I do well. And so I'll lean into that and all that kind of stuff. But I always knew that I needed to work on the interior arcs and not just the plot, and really getting character driven. Because in my mind, in my head, as I'm writing this, to me, they're character driven, but a lot of people said, oh no, these are plot driven with interesting characters. And this is the first book that really it feels character driven, and the ideas that the characters were experiencing and sussing out and working out and parsing on their journey is something that was pointed out by readers as a strong suit. And so hearing something that I thought was a weakness pointed out as a strength, that's probably been my biggest triumph.
Oh, I love that answer.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Very, very great answer.
Yeah. Seeing that evidence that you have improved on something that you weren't feeling very strong on. That's really good.
That's amazing. Yes. I always say being self-aware and knowing your weaknesses is so helpful, because then you work on, how do I counteract this? How do I balance things out? Because writing's all about balance, right? There's no, you can't never, there's no, you have to always, right? It's all about balance and finding that middle ground of everything. Where do you find influences for your writing? I know you kind of mentioned where some of the ideas have come from, but overall,
yeah, I'm a big fan of reading within your genre for reader expectations, because I don't want to make promises that I'm unaware of. I want my actions to follow my intention, and I think that's something that we sometimes forget, that your intentions can be fine, but if in a different context they're taken a certain way, you can't help that. You're not going to be there to explain yourself. So understanding what characters expect, understanding tropes, understanding the genre in a way that your reader will is super, super important to me. So reading widely within the genre, finding kind of dissecting the mechanics of bestsellers and popular books in the genre, seeing what makes it tick. And if I really like something, I'll like copy down a chapter. I'll type out a chapter. I'll literally take a chapter from a book that I like, and I'm like, oh, I really like what they do here, what their prose is doing, and all of that kind of stuff, and I'll type it out. If I really like a character's voice, I will go through and I will handwrite what's happening in that book and write it down just to get it in my bones and feel what it feels like, and let my brain take it apart. And then I'm not copying it, but I am creating a muscle memory
Right.
in a way in my
Of
head
doing
that I
that.
can
Yeah.
then apply to my books. I did that with Catherine Valenti's space opera.
Okay.
She has such an interesting way. She explains everything through vibes. Like, you never understand what anything really looks like, but you know what the character feels like surrounded by it.
Okay.
And I have a book. It's my magical murder mystery where she she becomes aware of this hidden world of magic. And I really wanted the prose to kind of shift, all the descriptions to shift. And so when I got to that part, it was in a revision. Once I get to the part where the veil was lifted, I literally wrote out a chapter of Catherine Valenti's space opera, and then really found myself using different diction, different word
Oh, I
choice
love
and
that.
syntax,
Yeah.
and it was really helpful.
Mhm. Absolutely. I mean, artists will go to a museum and like deliberately try to copy as
Yeah.
close as they can those paintings that they, the techniques they want to master.
Yeah.
And I think that's the same as what you're doing is you're learning to try that on and learning to walk that walk the way that they do it
Yeah.
Mhm.
by studying
Incorporating
that.
those techniques. Yeah.
Yes,
I love that.
you're studying
That's
the
great.
techniques.
I might steal that from you because that sounds like a really great way of approaching reading
Mhm.
like an author
Yeah,
as well. Yes. Yes.
please do. I'm doing that now with some romance, like
Yeah.
a back and forth banter that I really like. That's different than what I write. Like,
Right.
I love a good banter, a good like grumpy sunshine back and forth. But I've run into I want to do it a little differently for my next book, and so I'm literally copying down
Yeah.
a back and
Yeah.
forth dialogue. And honestly, more than anything, what surprised me is it's about the structure of the power shift in the beats. That
Right.
there are so
Okay.
many different beats where this person has the upper hand, then it switches very suddenly, and then back and
Right.
forth and back and forth. And
Right.
that's been fun to open up to that different side of structure that I haven't been used to.
Yeah. What a great way of adding some tension in too, though. Like especially if it's like a power struggle between two
Mm-hmm.
people, like who's gonna end up winning this interaction. Do you have any writing advice that you hate? So anything that just like really doesn't mesh with you, or
Oh man. There's so many.
yeah,
You don't have to write every day. People that say that you
right,
have to write every day, that's nonsense. Gosh, there's absolutely so much. I think anything that is prescriptive, anything that's kind of telling you how to write versus versus encouraging you to find a way for you to write. So
right,
anything
right.
that's like, don't use said or only use said, I think both of those are
Mm,
nonsense.
right.
Or like, don't use adverbs or do use adverbs. I think both of those are nonsense. And I think there are times to tell and not show, since I'm on the show.
Yes.
Uh, as long as it serves the story, you can break every single rule in the book. It's important to listen to the rules to understand them,
Right. You have to know the
especially
rules to break them. Yeah.
exactly, especially when it comes to uh, grammar. But as far as like advice, yeah, anything that is unwavering, unbendable, I'm
Yeah.
against it.
Yes, those absolutes are what most people really tend to hate because it is true that there's no such thing as always or never, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's always situations where it could work or it does work or whatever. So,
Mhm.
um, that's my favorite question to ask because I'm like, I want to get the hot take.
As long as you're consistent and you're telling it in a way that the reader understands, like
Right.
you can throw any rule out the window.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, yes. And the only reason why we say to follow grammar rules is because of clarity and understanding, right?
Mhm.
We need to understand what the sentence is functioning as doing. But, even then you can sometimes break rules, right? Where we can make a noun a verb. Or that
Absolutely.
happens all the time in common language. Yes. No, I was one of those. I think originally as a young person, I was very into the prescriptivist. There's a formal English, there's a proper English, and there's, a reason why we have it. And then I went to college and I was like, oh, no, all English is good. All English, all language is good. It's just about communication. Do you understand the other person? If you did, so then it works, right? And it was such a big shift for me, though, because I come from a background where I have an immigrant mother who was always being criticized or put down for not having perfect English. And so it kind of was like ingrained in me as a child that, like, you have to perform this language perfectly, in order to get respect and stuff. And so it was very, very much freeing to go to college and be like, no, not everyone has to have perfect according to who, right? Language.
Yeah.
So there's no shoulds in life. So that was really freeing. But yes, knowing the rule to then break it is wonderful to do.
Mhm. So, where can we find you online? Where can people look up your books and your services? And what's the official release date for Witches of Fate?
Witches of Fate is currently out.
Oh,
It came out on the 13th.
Okay.
And anywhere that I am on social media, I am Jeffries Books. I'm at Jeffries Books on TikTok, on Instagram, on Facebook. I'm also jeffriesbooks.com. Yeah, so find myself at Jeffries Books.
mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you. We've had a blast out this conversation.
This has been great. And I just want to say for everyone watching
Yeah.
this, take the 2 seconds to hit subscribe, to hit like, give this 5 stars, interact. If you leave
Right.
comments, that tells the algorithmic deities that this is worth proliferating. So
Yeah.
take the time to push this out. It takes very, very little effort to do a lot for something that is doing a lot for you, that is teaching you some
Oh,
things and letting you find some books and letting you learn about your craft and stuff. So yeah, share it, like it, subscribe, and comment, and help a podcast out.
you're too kind. We appreciate it so much. Yes, anyone who listens along, we are like, oh yes, super amped for every single listener that we have, and
We
appreciate
really
every
appreciate our
listener.
regulars.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much for joining us again. Like I said, this was such a fun conversation, and thank you to everyone listening along at home. Remember, there is more than one way up a mountain, and our next episode will be releasing Friday as usual. We're nearing the end of season 3, so we will be taking a little break after that. But if you're interested in being a guest on the show, you can find us on social media at The Tell Not Show or email us at thetellnotshow@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening.
Thanks again for listening. If you enjoyed the show, consider subscribing and liking. We appreciate all the support. Julia J.K. Allen is an author, editor, and coach and can be found at hijinksrudder.com.
Kirsha Fox is an author, avid reader, gamer, and mother to 4, and you can find her at kirshafox.com. Thanks and see you next time.